Hey there, welcome to Rachie OT Mum, so good to connect. Today I'm going to speak about fine motor skills. So it's the end of our first academic term at school in South Africa, and this is the time that we sort of get a flurry of referrals. Teachers are worried about children. They've started picking up that some children may not be sort of where they'd like them to be in terms of fine motor skills. So I just have to say from the start, this is not a substitute for an OT assessment. So if your teacher has recommended that your child see an OT for assessment, definitely take them, do it as soon as possible. Early intervention makes all the difference. But if you're just looking for some guidance and ideas, then hopefully this will help you. So you must remember that your teacher's seeing your child doing classroom functional fine motor skills. And that's a really small percentage of fine motor skills. And also those fine motor skills sort of rest on a whole wall of hand development that happens prior to this, and whole body development actually. So rather than training your child to do the skill that they're doing in the classroom, which you can do, the problem is that they might become really good at that skill and still not have the foundation underlying hand skills. Or they might become really resistant to doing it. So for example, if you want to get them to cut nicely and you make them practice cutting along a line, they might just become really resistant to cutting because they start feeling they're really awful at it. So instead of doing that, I would suggest you meet your child where they are and you start working on hand development where they are. Now, hand development is a really sort of complex process. It starts from birth. Our hands are very flat. You'll have noticed babies' hands are very flat, and any weight bearing we do really just starts developing those arches of the hand, which is so important for strength. It's also so important to be able to use both different sides of the hand independently. So a lot of our fine motor skills requires that we use this part of our hand as our support and this part of our hand as our action, so writing or cutting, and in order for us to be able to do that, we need to have developed those arches of the hand properly so we can dissociate the two sides of the hand. And we also, and that hand strength is the way that we do that. We also need to have developed our power grasps, or our grasps that use strength before we can do the fine ones. So opening a jar, holding big balls, swinging ourselves on monkey bars. Those are all things that are going to develop hand strength and are really going to help as laying down the foundation for those smaller things. So if your child is a child who doesn't like to sit down and do fine motor stuff, you can still work on developing those those underlying hand skills by doing gross motor things. Any weight bearing, so wheelbarrows where you get your child to walk on their hands and you hold their legs up, pushing against the wall. So we play a really fun game at home where I jump onto a couch or a chair, a sturdy couch or a chair, and I get my boys to push me across the room. So really using their hands, practicing that force. Then of course there's the whole sensory side where you can get goo and gloop and slime, and you can hide things in and really get them to pull those apart. Play-Doh is really, really great. Those are getting all of those little hand muscles working. So you can really work on those. But what I think that the main thing that you need to focus on is just meeting your child where they are. So for example, if your child loves being outside, loves the outdoors, loves nature, loves adventuring, going on adventures, putting your child inside and sitting them at a desk and telling them to draw is really not going to be useful. But if when you go on your adventure, you take a pair of scissors with you and you cut different leaves and you see how many different leaves you can find, and then you bring those leaves home and then you get crayon shavings and you put the leaf under a paper and you get them to rub the shape of the leaf out. That's using an interest that they love, and you're creating a whole lot of opportunity for fine motor skills in that. Likewise, if your child really loves making obstacle courses and planning great motor sequence things in the garden, well, get a few ropes and get them to tie ropes, Spider-Man ropes or webs from thing to thing. The action of tying the rope round, of creating those knots, of pulling those knots, being able to unpick those knots, those are all really great hand function skills. Start doing those enough and your child will be able to build on those and do the classroom skills. Another nice thing is, if pencil grip is a problem, don't start with a pencil, don't start with a crayon, start outside with big chunky chalk and break the chalk short so they can't hold it in a sort of paintbrush grasp. They've really got to hold it in their fingers in a little fist, and get them to draw with chalk all over the ground. It's a really nice way of working on that grasp, getting the tactile feedback as the feeling of the ground is different underneath the chalk. It's a lot of resistance, so that's going to do a lot more for your child than getting them to practice coloring in. So I just think the key take home is that there's a ridiculous stat, something like in order for a pathway to the brain to become efficient, to be sort of myelinated and efficient, now that's learning any new skill, you need to do that. So in order for that to happen, the brain has to repeat something up to 400 times. Now that's a lot of repetition. If you think how many lines you're going to have to cut out to be able to cut along a line, that's a lot of lines. But there's one caveat, and that is unless the brain learns it through spontaneous play, and then it takes 10 to 20 repetitions. So it's a small fraction of the amount of time you're going to have to practice it if you're just learning the skill. So wherever you can, add a fine motor component to the play that your child is doing. Meet them where they're at. It will become meaningful, they will be able to generalize it, and they will be developing those skills that are the foundation for their classroom skills. So I hope that works. Let me know if you have any questions, if your child likes something particular. I'm happy to help you brainstorm ways you can introduce fine motor stuff to that type of activity. You've got to be a little bit creative, but it's far easier than taking on the battle of working on classroom fine motor skills all the time. And just know that any stuff you're doing around hand function, hand strength, using their hands spontaneously in play will impact on how their functional classroom hand skills develop. I hope it was useful. I will check in again next week.